Alright, welcome back everyone to another video, and this is going to be an interesting one. I am kind of starting a new series called Discs from My Box, and these are basically operating systems that I have collected over the years in a physical CD format, none of that USB boot rubbish. And yes, so I rediscovered my stash earlier this week, and it had pretty nice collection of operating system disks that I wanted to go through. And so some of them are just uh, discs that I got with magazines. Those are usually well-known operating systems, like this one, and yeah. So we will go through some of them, but initially I just want to go through single operating systems that have a nice story behind them for me personally. And the first one, I think the best one to start with, was the SuSe Linux Enterprise Server Edition, so SLES 10. So this is back from 2008 2011ish. I don't really remember the exact date. This is the 32-bit server evaluation software. I had the full collection of these, so both 64-bit and 32-bit and then like for server and desktop. They have a pretty decent minimum system requirement, so 512 megabytes of RAM, 750 megabytes of disk space for software, and 750 for user space. Um, so yeah, this is kind of where it is. For 32-bit platform, this was back when Novell still owned SUSE. Um, yeah. So let's go straight into it. This was the first Linux I ever touched, and before that, the only thing I knew was Windows. Not even Mac. I wasn't that into Apple back in the day. But um, this was my first experience with Linux, and let's try and relive that. I'll go through the different bases and what all we did and how it all worked, how it all came together. So let's go ahead and launch SLES 10. So it launches with a nice kind of animation and a boot logo saying welcome in different languages. Here's your in grub. This is, I think, the older grub, if I'm not wrong. So let's go and select installation. It loads the kernel in a few seconds, um, and it starts. We'll let this load, but the virtual machine is a dual core without PAE and all of that fancy stuff. With I'm not sure what the. Let's see how I set up the virtual machine. I'm forgetting right now. So okay, two processors with PAE NX and with acceleration, and then other few things. Although we didn't really need PAE NX, we are just using 2 gigabytes of memory, and then the 32 gigabyte virtual disk. And here we have loaded into the installer. Let's capture a mouse. We have US or UK. We select US. Press next. This is the license agreement. Now most of it should be GPL, but Enterprise Linux sometimes have codes that are not strictly there in GPL. But yeah, um, let's go ahead and agree. Click next. So now it just looks for this kind of very old school installer, and then we'll go with new install. Time zone, let's select my actual time zone for a change, which I'm not seeing here. Okay, so no. Yep, it was still Calcutta back then. No one changed that. Um, Click next, and it will review everything there is, and we can actually change the overview. So it shows my actual CPU, and then the memory has just 2 gigabytes. So that will create a swap partition and a single root partition. And yep, we have grub, and then it boots on SDA2. Okay, let's see, change partitioning. So we had LVM back in the day, and yeah, let's just go with the default. And it's their own custom file system, Riser FS. Let's see what that's about. So this is the first time I'm hearing, or I remember hearing about this. Now, right now, we usually use Btrfs or just some plain old extended journal ext4, ext3, and stuff like that. But it was the default file system for novel SuSe Linux Enterprise, and they decided to move to ext3 on October 12th, 2006. So for some reason, it still defaults to Riser FS, and there's not much about it. It doesn't seem to be, and it supported LVM. That's why they are defaulting to it. Yeah, it doesn't seem to say if it merged with any other project, because this is kind of the first time I'm hearing about it in an older operating systems. And I would have heard about it, but like not all operating systems seem to even have the option to format as Riser FS right now. First time I'm looking at it. So let's go. And back in the day, LVM confused me a lot, and that's why half of the time my installations failed with this. Again, that was my first experience with Linux. So, you know, Windows didn't have any of that. We just had FAT32 or NTFS. And so let's go ahead and click on accept, move forward. Of course, again, there is a license agreement for a particular package, which is the AGFA monotype, and yeah, just EULA. So probably some binary in there, and agree, and then let's go ahead and select install. Let's see how fast this is on a modern CPU, because back in the day I did this on a Core 2 Duo, and I'm sure my current CPU is much faster than that. So it's trying to get things off of the CD, and it will just install them. So it shows here total is 1.34 gigabytes, which is kind of in line with what we saw on the disk of 500 750 per 750. Alright, so it looks like it's done installing packages, and it's just installing the boot manager, and that's it. It's done, and it will reboot in 5 seconds. So that is a lot like Windows would install in a way, because it reboots once and then reboots again to set up the system. And that's kind of the vibe I'm getting here from SuSe. And then we can just reboot from hard disk this time, and you can see we have our SLES server 10, service pack 2, and we'll just wait for that to boot. And from what I remember, this will now go into creating users and stuff. That the little SuSe Linux Enterprise logo on top of the console was a nice little touch, I think. And password for root user, I think that should be enough. And next, okay, host name, I don't really want to get into that, that's fine. Next, network selection, so that would be the virtual machines network. Let's see if it detects any. So yep, that's about that. Next, so download the new latest release notes and check for latest updates. It's going to be fun to see how it is after almost 10 years. So let's see if they have any updates for us. if they can even ping their update server if it remains the same. Considering that this is an enterprise product, it should have things already set up and working. So I think it was recently abandoned, this release, in favor of 12, 13, and 14. But let's see if it's and let's go next on there. I don't have any registration code as far as I can remember, and let's click next on there. Of course, an error occurred connecting to the server. Let's see the details. SSL certificate problem. Of course, we'll skip this step then. So yes, the SLES version 10 that I'm running has its end of life already. It's past its end of life, which was on 30th July 2016. So it's 2 years over its end of life. And let's move on with the installation. Yast, I think they use Yast 2 now. And earlier it was just the older YAST. Authentication method is fine. User's full name, I'll just go with this. And release notes. Okay, so yeah, well, I'm not going to go through all of that, but use the following configurations, which is fine. Let's see if it ends up having a GUI. I'm not sure if it does. I didn't check in the beginning. Well, let's not do that and finish. Let's see if you're greeted with anything other than a command line interface. So on the top corner, you can see the novel logo and it just says SuSe Linux Enterprise while the console is running. That's what I was talking about earlier. So it looks like we have a Xorg based graphical user interface, which is neat. And this will also in a second tell us when was the kernel built and also tell us what build this is precisely. And so this is KDE from back in the day. GNOME, why do they have a GNOME server? I'm not sure. Is this not KDE then, or am I just forgetting stuff? Alright, so text is too small, but you name A. This is a build from the year 2008. So yeah, the CD was right. It's a pretty old build. Almost, yep, 10-year anniversary was this May, and we just surpassed the 10-year anniversary. Firefox version, let's see, help about version 2, Firefox version 2.0.14, and we are just having security protocol or SSL errors throughout because the system is not updated. We have the Yast manager, which we can use to update the system, and we'll take a look in a bit. We have LibreOffice, or I think it was the OpenOffice package back in the day. Let's see, applications, more applications, and we have system component browser, software installer, but I'm looking. So it does look like GNOME. I'm not sure why I thought this was KDE. So okay, so we don't have OpenOffice installed, that's why it cannot open it. So let's go to Yast 2 and see what we can do, like in the name of updates and what all is available to us to download. So software and online update, and let's see if it finds anything. Well, that was kind of it. My first experience with this and not working and removing it was the fact that um, the internet didn't work at the first try when I installed it because the driver wasn't there, so I couldn't do this, and I had no idea how things would work. And what I ended up doing was downloading a file which had a package to compile and install the kernel modules for that driver. Now, if that happens to me today, that wouldn't be an issue. I would just do it because I know how I've done it before. But at that time, that was a big issue. So I uninstalled it, reinstalled it over and over again with different settings, trying to hope something works. But the network card wasn't supported straight off, so I switched to Ubuntu after 2 years of not using Linux, and then I got a new card because my onboard network interface failed, and then SuSe would work. So I then ran this for a few more years before switching back to Ubuntu, and then just being a distro hopper, where this thing comes in. So let's talk a bit more about SuSe, because I think I've kind of wasted a lot of time just trying other things. So YAS is their system manager. This is kind of a thing that enterprise grade Linux have. They have a system manager, so you don't have to open the terminal that often, and you can just check everything from here. We didn't have complicated things like systemd back in the day, so this is probably running initd at best, and Mm, yeah, so you can configure pretty much everything from this YAS to controller, um, control center, and you didn't have much in the name of applications because again this was a server build. You weren't supposed to. You had a CD and DVD creator. I mean, you would still get a bit. You can get away with doing most of the things. There's some Qt4 settings here, so I guess the UI is Qt plus GNOME, and that's why I was kind of thrown off a bit of this actually being KDE, because KDE is entirely Qt based. And then you have your help, which is a very comprehensive guide. So, like a system administrator would have to go through this with RAID configuration and stuff like that. So again, in enterprise Linux means you have a very, very long time support, um, and you just deploy it and kind of forget about it. And if you have an issue, you just call people up and they help you with your issues, and that's what you pay for. So yes, this was a paid product. This is an evaluation product, so it's not paid in this instance. But if you actually go ahead and buy enterprise Linux, you're not buying the operating system, because of course that's open source, but what you're buying is the service, and that's how a Linux based company earns. That's how Red Hat earns. That's how SUSE earns. That's how Ubuntu earns. That's how pretty much everyone else earns, apart from contributions and like monetary contributions for a lot of the smaller organization like Arc Linux, and things like that. They have larger investors and members and stuff like that. So yes, this is SuSe Enterprise Grade Linux. I'm not sure if they have a whole lot in the name of desktop backgrounds, which I guess I was wrong. They have a bunch of desktop backgrounds, even if it's something that's going to run on the server. In this day and age, if you go ahead and install server on your Linux system, it just ends up being a non-GUI based thing. Like Ubuntu server does not have a GUI by default, but things were different back in the day, I guess. And even if they want, this is an enterprise grade Linux, so you could have changed it and stuff like that. So I can just open terminal here, and so the CPU info shows my actual CPU here, and that's about it. Just the one core. I thought I had two. So this is interesting. I thought I had two cores. nproc is not installed, and cat CPU info is giving me just the one core. So you see processor 0, and that's it. Oh, it has then two cores per processor instead of going processor 0 and processor 1 like we do these days. So it just shows as two cores. So physical ID 0 and core ID 1, and then CPU core is 2. So if I run top and if I press 1, I should see CPU 0 and CPU 1, so that's just fine. And then free shows me the correct amount of memory that's free, so which is again fine. So yeah, that's about it. There's not much to do here. Very basic setup until unless you then go ahead, install stuff and set it up as a server. Again, this was my first Linux distribution that I've ever tried. Didn't go as smoothly as it did today, of course. Took me a few years to get through it, but that's about it. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you all in the next one.